Welcome to Preparing for AI with Matt Cartwright and Jimmy Rhodes, the podcast which investigates the effects of AI on jobs, one industry at a time. We dig deep into barriers to change, the coming backlash, and ideas for solutions and actions that individuals and groups can take. We're making it our mission to help you prepare for the human and social impacts of AI. So welcome back, episode 2 of Preparing for AI. Jimmy, how are you feeling this week?
I think I'm feeling equal parts doom and gloom and euphoric, which seems to be a good state to be in for this podcast.
Yeah, I think that's about as good as we can hope in the current world, right?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So just to remind everyone, we are preparing for AI. So we're a new podcast that hopefully doing something a bit different about AI, talking about the human and social impacts of AI with a focus on the impact on jobs. And this week is our first industry-specific episode. So we're going to dig deep into the barriers to change, the backlash that's coming, and hopefully end up with some positive ideas for solutions and actions which individuals, organizations, and society can take. So this is the creative industry, and we decided to do this because obviously OpenAI released limitedly Sora, and it's kind of blown the whole world's minds. I think the internet's gone crazy everywhere from, the US to China. And yeah, I think maybe Jimmy, you can, give us a bit of a view again on, where we are at the moment and how the hell we got here.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I think Sora has absolutely blown everyone's minds. For anyone who doesn't know what Sora is, I'd recommend doing a quick YouTube search and taking a look at some of the videos that you can, well, not that you can, but that OpenAI have been able to generate by literally typing in a text prompt. So, pirate ship in a cup of coffee, that kind of thing. And the videos that it generates, they're not perfect, but given what we talked about last time and how quickly AI is evolving, you can easily see at the moment they can generate 1-minute videos that look very realistic. AI video's been pretty difficult to crack. But again, that's over the last year. And OpenAI have just come out and said, we can now generate pretty much indistinguishable from reality videos that are 1 minute long, and that are consistent. So that was one of the problems with AI video previously, is you didn't have consistency over time. So things would shimmer and things would move about and wouldn't make sense. Words would disappear and reappear again. That's pretty much gone with this new iteration of text to video. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. The rate of change in AI just seems to keep getting quicker and quicker. And every week it's a new shock. It's a new surprise. It's, something unexpected. And Sora definitely fits with that.
I've seen a lot of other people saying similar things than this, but my sort of initial view was, yeah, wow, but what's the point? I mean, and I don't mean that in terms of, yes, I understand that the technology behind it is actually what's amazing here. It's not the 1-minute video, but if you think of the positive sort of outcomes of this particular thing, so being able to generate, video from text, and you think about the negatives massively outweigh the positives, right? I mean, there are so many, and I do understand as well, like there's a lot of rumors that actually that's why this has been put out there, because actually OpenAI like, right, we want to start that debate about, oh, wow, think about all the kind of negatives. And we talked in episode 1 about, the industry's been talking about regulating itself. I know there's a lot of rumors that this is why this has been put out here, but, listing the bad use of this, deep fakes, post-truth world, manipulation of elections, it goes on. And the positives is someone can make a video of a cat jumping up and down on a bed. I mean, like, is this really what we need to be getting excited about? Like, is this the use of AI that we should all be getting, so crazy and so into? Or is this just is it a red herring? Is this not really the use of Sora or the technology behind Sora?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in everything you just said. I think that there's a couple of things there. So I think obviously making unlimited amounts of cat videos not necessarily hugely useful. But on the positive side, I mean, looking at the rate that AI has evolved, I can fully imagine being able to, in a year's time, maybe I can, create my own version of Star Wars, which is just created from a prompt, which is based on my imagination. Potentially this applies to things like video games as well. So, everything is going to be limited only by your imagination potentially. So in terms of the positives, I think there are loads of positives in the in the entertainment space. You're not going to be restricted to having to watch what you're being spoon fed by Disney or by whoever.
No, you watch what you get spoon fed by the algorithm, right?
Well, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit in the last episode about the fact that a lot of these models, you're now getting open source models that are starting to compete with things like that OpenAI can produce, and Facebook and Microsoft and Google. And I think that will continue. So actually, I kind of disagree. I think ultimately the censorship and the getting spoon fed by the algorithm thing, I don't think that's going to fly. I think you're going to be able to ultimately run an open source model and live in whatever fantasy you want to live in.
I mean, maybe that's wrong. The algorithm's not creating the videos, right? But there's enough disinformation out there. How easy does it suddenly become to create more and more disinformation? And that's my fear is, do we need more disinformation? We've got enough of it already. Now we're essentially talking about a tool that allows you to create anything. I mean, there's a post-truth world, and then there's a world in which, you don't. I mean, is that where we end up? We don't believe anything unless we've seen it with our own eyes, and actually maybe we still don't believe it then. Am I getting carried away?
No, I don't think you're getting carried away. I already feel a little bit like that. I mean, we're talking about AI now, like this Sora's like the next evolution. You can already spread fake news on Facebook, on social media, in terms of like text. You can already do that. It's already been done. We already know.
You mean there are bots out there?
Yeah.
Exactly. Not everything's real?
Exactly. I mean, is
this my woke moment?
But it's basically like, it's known at this point, right, that there was interference in the US election, in the last US election. And I'm not saying Donald Trump wouldn't have got voted in if the Russians hadn't interfered, but it's been proven that they interfered.
Legal disclaimer: we don't know if they interfered.
I think the FBI have proved that they interfered. Legal disclaimers aside, I mean, you're absolutely right. So we are going to be moving into a world where it's going to become increasingly difficult to believe what you can see. OpenAI, if we're talking about Sora specifically, OpenAI have said they're going to put some kind of digital watermark in their AI videos so that you can pick up when you can know that something's been made by AI. But that's not going to be a long-term solution, because, as I said, these open source models will get around that.
Exactly. And in every industry, I guess that's one of the fears around the kind of regulation or deregulation is we're relying on firms to put things in place, but actually, and this is a complicated thing. I guess there's a positive thing in here about AI, but the democratization of AI, the fact that it's being opened out to open source models, there are positives in there around that democratization of it, but there are negatives in there that, how do you control what the, and again, it's a kind of stereotype, but the 16-year-old genius at home on his computer is creating. That's maybe more the fear. It's the technology rather than the organization as such. Once the technology's out there and it's democratized, then we don't know what people are doing. And that again comes back to the point I'm making about abuse, right? It's surely open. The abuse and the open to abuse is surely more of a negative than the positive of I can create my own Star Wars movie.
Yeah, so I agree. I don't know. Like I mean, maybe we're getting into a debate that's not necessarily the sort of subject of the podcast overall, but I've got like quite strong views about copyright and how copyright's been abused over the years, and it's been extended and extended and extended, and like now Disney effectively have copyrighted everything they've ever done pretty much forever. So I'm actually for the democratization of, creativity. And if you think about how many people out there have got a vision for something, but they can't create it, actually on a positive side, AI and these kind of video generation tools and image generation tools allow you to sort of unleash that creativity, for want of a better word. So I would say I would say personally, that's a huge positive. I mean, we'll talk about the impact on jobs in a little while, which obviously is is an immediate concern and kind of the whole point of this podcast. But I genuinely think that, I mean, I've created images with AI. I've created images that I would never have been able to create without the help of a graphic designer or an artist or something like that. And it's really fun.
I created a Christmas jumper with kebabs and Fulham Football Club on it. So I'm all for being able to create images. But again, I feel like I'm talking about the positive side of this is there is less net positive than there is net negative from the ability of people to use this. I mean, like everything, actually the problem is people, right? The problem is not the technology. The problem is people. But I feel like, again, me being able to do that doesn't make up for all the abuse that is potentially there.
And that's where I think hopefully this podcast will help if we get some viewers, listeners. I think people absolutely, if you haven't educated yourself already on the need to fact check and question everything you see online, then you really need to start thinking about that. I mean, right now, everything that you read online certainly has there's a massive potential for that to be manipulating you, to be someone's opinion, to be incorrect. So you either need to fact check everything, or you just need to a certain extent, take everything with a pinch of salt. And I think what you're talking about, the challenge, is that that's going to be everything in the future, which I agree.
So we just all go back to living in the forest, right?
I think do you, when you see something online, do you always believe it?
So I would have said to you 5 years ago, that I would have said, I think I can, work out what's what. But I think now I have no idea. And, I try and stay away from a lot of social media because one thing I realize the algorithm, but I still get hooked in by it. And I see the same people commenting, and then I see the same people commenting, and I think, oh, maybe this is not everyone's opinion. Actually, this is just a small number of people, but like they've got 20,000 followers, and that seems like a lot of people, but how many of those are real people? And, I think I don't believe everything I read, but I think I find it difficult, and I think I'm no longer able to, think rationally and see that stuff. And maybe in the future, it's kind of, in some ways, a kind of freedom to say, hey, I actually now just can't believe anything. Maybe that's easier than I don't know what to believe, because I can't believe anything. We go back to almost like a leap of faith and deciding what I believe and just following it rather than being led by the information. Because I think at the moment, you're not knowing what you believe. It's the information that leads you, and it's the algorithm. Actually, if you don't trust anything, then you're almost more of a free will, I think, at that point.
I actually think, and I won't talk too much longer about this, but I actually think that this has been going on for a lot longer than recent times and the advent of the internet and social media. I think prior to that, you had newspapers with an agenda. You had TV channels with an agenda. Maybe it was more subtle. Now you've just got a situation where more people can have an agenda and more people can express themselves online. And there's loads of negatives to it and all the rest of it. But I don't think it's necessarily a recent thing. I think it's a recent epidemic. I don't necessarily think it's entirely a recent thing.
Okay, so let's have a look at, we're talking about the creative industry today. So let's have a look at jobs and kind of where we are now and what's already happened. So we're going to look ahead, but I think as we have done last time, maybe Jimmy, you could talk us through, what's happened to this point and how we've got there.
Yeah, so if we're talking about Sora, obviously we're talking about the creative industry. So the tools that came out in 2023 rapidly evolved. We had tools such as DALL-E, we had Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, which is the open source equivalent. They all evolved. I think Midjourney's on version 3 now. I think DALL-E's on version 3 now. Probably version 4 was just around the corner. And we went from to be honest, fairly cartoonish images where none of the words were spelled correctly. People had 6 fingers, things like that.
Still can't spell the words right. That kind of amazes me.
Well, The latest version of Stable Diffusion just dropped, and actually it gets words correct most of the time. I think more of the time now. I think it's a problem that we're going to see going away. I mean, if you want to get into kind of how the models work, then there's reason behind why these image models don't really find it hard to spell things correctly and have the correct number of fingers.
Large language models are looking at text, aren't they? And they're predicting what would come next, whereas the image model is not. It doesn't contain. It's a separate thing. It doesn't contain the same technology. So just because a chat GPT spit out text in a correct way doesn't mean that image creation AIs can, because they're completely different things. And maybe that, there's a combination at some point, but I guess it's one of the things that makes people think, oh, well, hey, this is not going to make a change because it can't even spell, it couldn't even spell kebab on my Christmas jumper, but that's almost a bit of a red herring here, because it's not that the technology doesn't exist. It's just that this is a different piece of tech, right? It's a different kind of AI.
Yeah, exactly. So one's based on transformer models, which is kind of your large language models, and diffusion models are a completely different type of model, which are used for creating images and creating videos, which is kind of the recent development. But ultimately, it's, as you say, it's a red herring, because what you'll get is a load of people jumping on it being like, oh, it can't spell things correctly, someone's got 6 fingers, whatever. If you look at the evolution of it, clearly all that stuff is going to go away, and probably go away fairly quickly. And Sora is kind of the ultimate realization of that. If you get a chance to look up Sora and check out some of the videos, I'd definitely recommend doing it. Again, not 100% perfect, but if you look at where we've come, I think there's some good videos online which show where we've come from with this the Will Smith video, the famous Will Smith eating spaghetti video that was early 2023, I believe, compared to where we are now. And it's really easy to see the trajectory of it. And it's going to be videos and images that are indistinguishable from reality.
So what jobs have been affected to this point?
You've got the most recent one is literally off the back of Sora. So Tyler Perry put an $800 million investment on hold, literally right after Sora came out. And that was an investment in a visual effects kind of studio that was going to be doing exactly this kind of work. So they're not necessarily jobs lost, but it's kind of future jobs lost, right? And he's done that because he can see where this is going. And you're seeing other similar kind of things. You had it's a slightly different industry, but you had the writers' strike last year, in which they actually fairly successfully managed to agree that ChatGPT would not basically take their jobs. But the point is, the current version is maybe not quite there. But in the future, we're talking about graphic designers, we're talking about video game developers, we're talking about anyone who works in that, creative industry space.
Animation studios, presumably.
Yeah, animation studios, absolutely. So it's a potentially a huge number of jobs that could be impacted, and I think a lot of those. In a lot of those industries, you're hearing rumblings now and hearing starting to see some extreme dissatisfaction with the current progress that AI is making.
You mean that it's too quick?
I just mean that people can see the writing on the wall. I think that people can see that this is something that threatens their job, basically. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later on how you can prepare for that and some of the things you can do, but ultimately, I think at this point, slowing down the progress is probably off the cards or out of the question. So we're going to have to look at what kind of governments can do to intervene, what kind of things that you can do to have a think about how this is going to affect you and how you can plan for that. But I think stopping AI at the moment is probably not really in the realms of reality.
But we've not seen mass layoffs of, from animation studios. So, Pixar, for example, we've not seen announcements, right? We haven't seen at this point we haven't seen large layoffs in those industries. Like we have seen that in the tech industry, right? But we haven't seen it in the creative industry yet. It's more about the direction of travel, right?
It's the direction of travel. I don't think you've seen mass layoffs. I think what's probably been happening under, in stealth a little bit is, I would imagine that people who need to design a logo for their company, maybe if it doesn't include text, but if people who are designing a logo for their company, are they now going and paying a graphic designer, or are they typing something into ChatGPT and going, that will do?
Yeah, and I mean that. Yeah, I think that movement happened some time ago. I mean, I run a kids baseball team, and I designed my logo last year, maybe September, and I didn't use AI as such, or I didn't know I was using AI as such, but I was using, image software that now I realize was basically AI. So yeah, that happened without even knowing it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I've created logos for things. I mean, I'm not doing anything of super high importance, but you can guarantee that companies are already looking into this, if not using it already, if not, applying it. And I think, as we discussed last time, I think most of the layoffs initially will be, especially right now, will be by stealth, where it's, the reason that's given is not necessarily AI, but are those jobs ever going to come back again?
Well, I mean, we chose this industry for the first episode, one, because, Sora in particular is just that's the big thing in the news, but also because this is one of the industries where I think you can clearly see the path ahead, right? So in some industries, that AI is coming, but maybe it's more difficult to work out. And if we're looking, at more manufacturing engineering industry where it requires robotics and there's a longer kind of glide path into that. Whereas this, like you say, you can see that if Sora can create a 1 minute short, surely it will soon be able to create a 10-minute short, right? Which is the death of, all CGI animated cartoons, right? I mean, that's where we're headed in the next year, surely.
Absolutely. And I think that's why, what would you call that $800 million investment being postponed? A canary in the mine, by Tyler Perry.
He's only postponed it.
Yeah, he's only postponed it, but I mean, what does that really mean? Is that $800 million investment going to come back?
Well, I mean, if it's in a studio to do anything that involves FX and animation, then surely not. And unless everything goes, everything goes tits up and the whole thing falls apart, which seems unlikely. I guess one thing we should say at this point is Sora is only being tested by some developers and a certain kind of number of I guess not regulators, but people who are testing the safety of it. So it's not out there as a tool yet. I mean, that doesn't give much hope for the future, but I think that's an important point, is this technology exists, but it's not out there in the kind of public domain at the moment. Does that matter?
I don't think so. I think I think, as I said before, the writing's on the wall. Like, the rate of pace of change we've seen in 2023 means that by the end of 2024, 100% you're going to have open source models that can do similar stuff to what OpenAI can do right now. You're going to see Sora released, maybe even in a limited way, to the public. You're going to see the next evolution of this. Stable Diffusion just announced after, almost straight after the OpenAI announcement about Sora, Stable Diffusion announced that their new model can generate video in a more coherent, cohesive manner in a similar way to OpenAI. Now, they hinted at the fact that it's going to require huge computing resources, and they don't have the same kind of resources as OpenAI, but the rate and the pace of change, and it's not just the the chips are getting better and cheaper, the algorithms are getting better and cheaper, everything's getting more efficient, easier. People are coming up. I mean, AI is still not peaked in terms of like the algorithms and the models that they're developing. So the next version of the model is even more efficient.
Aren't we in a world chip shortage? Because we kept hearing about lack of chips for electric cars and holding back hardware. So doesn't that hold things up at some point?
I think it does hold things up, but I think the chip shortage to a large part, the chip shortage to a large part is kind of past now. And also, the amount of investment in AI is unbelievable. The scale that the industry and the investment is growing. We talked last time about Sam Altman's seeking $7 trillion. If he even gets half or a quarter of that, you're talking about trillions of dollars being invested in the industry.
So I guess we've started talking about where we're heading, but at the moment we're only really talking about short video and animation. We're talking about graphic design, but what we're not talking, or are we talking here about? Is this replacing TV? Do we still have actors? You talked about the screenwriters in Hollywood. I mean, do we still have scripts written by people? Surely AI can. I mean, AI can write those scripts, but what else are we heading for? It's difficult to look ahead really more than a year or two, but where do you think we're going to be in 12 months time?
In 12 months time, I wouldn't be surprised if you can put a prompt into an AI and basically watch a full-length feature film. Now, it may not be great, may not be Oscar award winning, but it will potentially be a feature film that's come out of your own imagination. That's where I think we'll be in 12 months' time, honestly. We've gone from...
I'm not sure I want to see a film that came out of your imagination.
Well, you can watch one that's come out of my imagination in 12 months' time. We've gone from 1 year ago being able to make very rough 5-second videos that are completely incoherent in terms of they're not cohesive, to a year later being able to make a 1-minute video. So that's nearly 10 times longer. That is completely cohesive. And, if you weren't looking really closely, you would believe was a real video. So honestly, do I think we'll get to an hour in a year's time? Probably.
And what does that mean? Because we're talking about the effects on jobs. I mean, is it the end of... It's not the end of actors, right? I mean, we don't want to watch everything AI generated. Surely there's still a world in which we want to see real people and theatre and live performances. I mean, it's not just, particularly with the arts, right? It's not just about what you see. It's also about the fact that someone has created that piece of art. For older generations anyway. Maybe for the younger generation, they're not going to care, but for older generations, I guess what I'm saying is I still see a world for real, documentaries and things that are made. I guess documentaries maybe CGI, but things that are filmed live as well. But maybe that's only at the kind of top end of the market.
I don't know. I mean, you're talking about the sort of human aspect of these kinds of things, and I agree to a certain extent. In a world where AI art is everywhere, then what's the value of that art? Then yes, I agree. But your point about it being only the top end is also important. So if we want to talk a little bit more about jobs, your artists, your your world-renowned artists, your Banksys, people like that, they're never going to get replaced. But we're probably not worried about the Banksys of the world, and it's the kind of middle ground, which is all of your graphic designers, all of your visual effects designers, all of your game designers who are designing digital assets for games and digital worlds and things like that.
Marketing, creatives.
In a video game, is anyone going to care whether an artist created the rock that you're walking past?
And in a marketing campaign, I don't care who created that, or in a commercial or...
Yeah, exactly. The commercial world's not going to care if it looks good enough. if your rendition of a Coke can, or whatever, your rendition of a car or whatever it is, if it looks accurate and works, then you're going to pay OpenAI.
Well, I guess we're not going to know, are we? Because if it's that accurate, maybe we're already looking at adverts of AI generated Coke cans.
Very
I don't
possibly.
think I don't think that's my primary concern, but
Yeah, exactly. The fact of the matter is, AI is going to do it cheaper. It's going to do it 24 hours a day, and all the rest of it. And it's I think on this podcast we're sort of concerned with the mass job market rather than your kind of Tom Cruises of the world and your Banksies.
we talked in the introduction about a backlash, and it's the point that I guess I probably will come to a lot, because it's what I expect and fear, and it's what I think will be the kind of big uprising, the thing that brings it to everybody's attention. And you talked before about the strikes that went on previously. I mean, on that kind of basis, is this where the first social unrest and protests and upheaval and whatever that looks like, is this where it comes from? Because it feels like this is the industry and tech, but tech kind of can't protest because this is where tech's where the jobs are going, but they're also where the AI jobs are coming. So this feels like the first industry that really is kind of, you can see the end for a lot of people. Is this where this kind of backlash starts?
I think so, potentially. I think, the writers in the US have a really great union, so they're able to make changes in their industry. I'm not sure how long that will last. I'm not sure if that's the case with the creative industry. But yeah, I think you're going to see job losses in this kind of sector in the next, maybe not 12 months. I think the technology still needs to mature, but if you're looking 2 to 5 years down the road, then absolutely. And I would definitely keep an eye on the pace of evolution of this kind of technology. And that's one of the things that I would say is we sort of touched on it last episode, but familiarize yourself with these AI tools, because as a creative, you still have those creative ideas, you still have those creative visions. Maybe in the future you're not necessarily literally drawing something by hand or on a computer. Maybe it's AI assisted, but not everyone has that creative capacity, and you still need to be able to tell a cohesive story. And I don't think AI is very good at that yet. And I'm not sure it will ever surpass humans in a way. Like, you still need to put your own creative input into ChatGPT or Midjourney or Sora. It doesn't do anything unless you ask it to.
Okay, so shall we look at what people can do to get ready? I guess we're talking about people in those creative industries. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're in that industry and you presumably now a doomer and you're only thinking the worst. I mean, what can people do? What can they start? Or maybe that's just start using AI tools, or is it just go and get a job in another industry or retrain?
Probably start learning to farm, I think.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, that does seem like the farmers are protesting at the moment. It seems like it should be an industry that's safe, but it seems like an industry that's got its own problems.
In all seriousness, we talked about it a little bit last time. I think, honestly, if AI is going to come for your job, then have a think about what it is that motivates you in life. Like, if you want to stay in the industry that you're in, then I would recommend upskilling in the use of AI tools. As you said last time, not necessarily becoming an AI engineer or something like that. I'm talking about what I talked about a few minutes ago, about learning how to apply these tools in your industry. I think in the short term, maybe even the medium term, that's something that you can learn to apply. If you're an artist that likes drawing and likes, putting pen to paper or putting brush to paper, then probably, honestly, you're going to have to lean on AI at least for some kind of support. And maybe there's kind of a blended approach where you work with AI, but then you put the final touches on something. But I think with the speed at which AI can produce these kind of images and videos, and obviously the cost advantage it has, then if you want to stay in that industry, I think you need to learn how to use these tools.
So basically, upskilling in AI is a kind of temporary step, right? It's a way in which some people will be able to keep their jobs for a period of time. But what we're saying is, if you want to be creative, you probably need to find new ways to be creative. And maybe even those other ways are going to be taken over by AI, but maybe not quite in the way of this industry, because it's going to happen here quicker, and it's going to happen here, in a way that is unstoppable.
I think we talked last episode. So if we want to be honest here, and I think we want to be honest, long term, AI is probably going to do everything. And if we get some way or on the way to that utopia that we talked about last episode, where you don't have to work as much, you don't have to necessarily work for a living, then ultimately, if your hobby, hobby's the wrong word, but if what you enjoy doing, if you enjoy your job and you're in the creative industry, then you're still going to be able to do that. You're not necessarily going to have to do it to earn money in the long term, but you're still going to be able to do it. It probably just it's a change in mindset to come around to the idea that you don't need to do what you enjoy doing for money anymore. You can just do it.
But you still need money for now.
Yeah, and that's where I think that short term, I genuinely think the short term thinking is look at how you can use and apply AI in the industry that you're in.
Maybe there's a really kind of key message in there, that any advice that we or anybody else can give, because we're not experts, we have an opinion on this, but any advice that anybody can give is going to get you through the short to medium term, because we don't know the long term. If the long term is what we think it is, and it's a world that looks so different that we can't contemplate it now. I can't contemplate what my kids' lives will look like or careers will look like. I can't contemplate the world in 15, 20 years time. So maybe the advice is look ahead 2, 3, 4, 5 years and find a pathway there, and be willing to be flexible. Again, it might not be about changing or retraining once, it's upskilling, training, changing several times. And that's a tough message, but that's the reality of where we are. The pace of change is exponential, and it's not going to just change once in most people's working lives. So, embrace those tools, but have a plan for a couple of years for now, and see where that leads us.
Yeah, and obviously listen to the podcast, because we're going to keep up to speed and keep you up to speed on the latest developments.
Thanks, Jimmy. I think that maybe it's time to call it a wrap. Next episode, we'll be coming at you with white collar office work. So we're going to look a bit more broadly, but look at the kind of generalist jobs, the kind of jobs that I've always done, and how those jobs are already being impacted, and the kind of tools that you can apply in those, hopefully to keep yourself relevant, and look at how that's going to change in the future. So have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Hi, everyone. This is Matt from the future, or at least it's the future compared to when we recorded this. I guess it's the past for when you're listening to it. So since we recorded the podcast, we've noticed actually a lot of things starting to come into the media about jobs being cut by stealth. So we thought we would add this little bit on and just bring you up to date on a couple of stories that we've seen out there. So the first one is by Brian Marchant in the LA Times. And there's an article highlighting what I would call pretty nuanced perspective on the impact of AI on employment, and particularly, as we discussed in this episode, on creative industries. So the suggestion here is that the introduction of AI into the workforce is, as we said, likely to result in a gradual reduction in job opportunities rather than the kind of abrupt large-scale layoffs that we would expect to see in the media. So this has been exemplified actually by the experience of freelancers, such as, and there's a great example in there of a veteran freelance illustrator who's just noticed a significant drop in work this year due to the adoption of AI image technology, and companies looking to start cutting costs. So the trend that we're seeing, as we said, indicates, the effect on AI on jobs might not be as overt as the replacement of human roles with robots, as people maybe thought years ago, but instead it's manifesting itself with a slow decline in available work. So therefore, you can easily see AI being used by executives and managers to help gin up investment in future forward products that require less labor costs, to buffer layoffs or to start, attrition in HR departments, and then to hire less part-time, zero hours contract or project-based workers. So the article basically, what it tells us really, there's no job apocalypse coming, at least not in the immediate future, but there's just a series of managers making the calls that they think will benefit their bottom line and serve their boards, which I guess in the world that we live in of shareholders is what they're supposed to do, AI or not. The second story, and this has been largely covered, for example, on the BBC website, was a story that came up the day after we recorded about Electronic Arts, EA, cancelling their Star Wars first-person shooter game and laying off about 670 employees globally, which is 5% of their workforce. So they've put this down to streamlining efforts to focus on, as they say, deeper, more connected experiences amid a wave of job cuts in the industry. And these layoffs and project cancellations, I guess they reflect the industry's challenge in obtaining funding for new studios and retaining talent. But the thing here is that the cancellation of this game, although it's part of a strategy to prioritize projects that align with player interests and market trends, and part of a broader industry of layoffs. So you've seen Microsoft and Sony as well in the gaming industry start to make cuts. And they don't mention AI. The gaming industry continues to grow. It's forecast to continue growing at least up until 2030. It's already bigger than the music industry. It's already bigger than the movie industry. So this is an enormous industry. If it's purely economic effects, then there's no reason to cut jobs. All this talk about, better player experiences, more tailored experiences, things that fit with what people want. This is all code for AI, right? This technology, technological advances that are making games more customizable, those are driven by artificial intelligence. So maybe I'm giving too much credit, but maybe, some of the executives don't even necessarily realize how much AI is impacting. But our view definitely, if you look at these examples, is even when AI is not the reason for the cuts, it's at least part of the reason. And one of these examples is direct cuts. One of it is more about, work drying up and there being less work out there because people are able to maybe do some of it themselves because there are more efficiencies. But make no mistake, this is where we're seeing the initial change. And I just love that quote about how there's no kind of apocalypse, because I think, well, there may be an apocalypse coming at some point, but in terms of a job apocalypse, this is not it. It's just this drip, drip, drip as positions and opportunities start to dry up. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you all hopefully next week. Adios.